Oh wait, you can't see me waving. There we go. Hi, my name is Mark, and I built this website that you see here. It's called 739, and the goal of the website is simply to provide a time-limited social media experience. So it's open for 3 hours every night. Right now, it's just on the Eastern time is what it's based on. It's 7:39 p.m. And closes at 10:39 p.m. And I'm using like the local hosting version of it right now. It's not the actual production version because it's closed at the moment. But you can see just the kind of content that it gets, and just some of the general functionality. So, people say hello, goodbye, and things like that. And other than that, it's just kind of like a fun site. Right now, it's a really small community. It started out much bigger, had some good article coverage, and it did really well on Hacker News and Reddit when I first launched. But it was something that I always thought of as like a fun experience. Now it's this close-knit community, and one of the things that I've really been sort of dragging my feet on is the process of building an application for it. So a mobile application, to be specific. And that's what I'm going to try to cover in this video here, is the process of creating an iOS application. So you can see it's fairly simple functionality, but it's kind of a full-fledged app. The benefit that we have is that the server is already running, and the endpoints already work. So we really just have to build a front end in iOS here. But yeah, it's fairly simple site. If you'd like to watch me build it, that's what this is going to be about. But if you just want to join the site, you're more than welcome to. It's a nice little community, and hopefully with the addition of a mobile app, we'll get a little bit more traffic and more users on the site. All right, so this is the initial app that we're working with. The hierarchy here is app, scene, window group, and content view is a custom view that we created that we're going to jump into in a minute here. And the main keyword just tells the app that this is the entry point. All right, so actually before we do that, I wanted to create a constants file just because we're going to start having some things that we use across app, and we should start putting them in a smart place. So you can create a constants file with an enum and start defining things that we want to use over and over again. For example, we can use I'm glad it's not just leaking an API key right now. Thank you, AI. But we have a primary color, and that's, I think these are just going to naturally match up to what we have on the web app, but we can check and see what that looks like. So we need to import to have access to colors, color dot indigo. Okay, is that right? Yeah. All right, so we need access to Swift UI. And then if we go back into content view, what we're going to do here is create a gradient view, which is just called, well, it's actually a linear gradient. I thought it was gradient view. A linear gradient. And we want to define a gradient itself, start and end. So the gradient is going to be made of those colors. So if we just create a gradient, we have a list of colors, constants dot secondary color. Okay, and we're going to clean this up a little bit so it's not so frustrating. So we have a gradient defined here. Give us some more room. Even more. Dang it. All right, that's fine. It's good enough. We want a start point, and this is just defining like the location of it. So the top leading edge, and we want to end it at the bottom trailing. Okay. Why is this bad? Okay, we have angry commas. Oh, simple. Okay. So let's go back to what we have here. And the only thing that we have is it respects the safe area. So if we just do ignore safe area, we should be good. All right, so next we want to start building this input form that you use to create a post. So we're just trying to go and replicate this visual look here. We have a pretty basic view here, obviously. It's just the linear gradient, but in reality, that's just our background. So we want to write something that allows us to treat that as an actual background. So the thing that we're going to use is called a Z-stack, which is basically just a list of elements and everything is kind of on top of each other in the order that you put it. So the innermost item is just the first one on the list of ZStack items. So anything after this is going to be on top of that. So that way we can kind of really treat that linear gradient as a background. So the next thing we're going to want that contains the rest of our application is basically just a scroll view. You know, it's a feed of posts. We want to be able to scroll down. So we're just going to use a scroll view. So now we want to build the actual text field that I was talking about before. And the first thing we need there is a place to store what we're typing in it, because the component we're going to use requires that as a parameter. And that's going to be a state variable for us. And that's a string type. Okay. And it just starts out as an empty string, because of course the form is going to be empty, and then we're going to update it as we type. Now the element that we want to use here is called a text editor. And this is a multi-line text editor that you might be familiar with as like a text area in terms of HTML. And that takes in a text parameter, which is new post text. I'm sorry, new post compose text. Okay, and that gives us right away in the canvas an editor. This will go forever. Like we can do multiple lines and it'll keep going. It'll go forever. We have no limit there. But we're going to start adding some constraints here. So for starters, we want to actually I'm going to add that last. There's kind of a common issue with disappearing white by default and not really respecting the background that you give it. But I'm going to add that at the end just so you can see what that looks like. We want to frame it with a maximum height of 120. So now it looks a little bit more like an actual compose box like we had on the website. We want to give it padding. So now it's out there a little bit more defined within the total frame of the window. We're going to give it that background color. And like I said, we want to kind of use the background that we have on the website. So we're going to just have 10% opacity there. Now you can see this is what I was talking about. It kind of does define that background, but the actual compose area is still that white background. So then we add kind of that little hack, if you will, which is and that kind of makes it seem kind of more like what we want it to look like. Another thing we can do right now is just give a regular padding to the scroll view, so all content gets this treatment, but now you can see it's really well defined. The one thing that might jump out at you right away is the actual website had a border radius or a corner radius. So we'll start with, let's say 10. Maybe a little bit more. Is that too much? Okay, so that's pretty nice. And I think it might look a little bit better with like a white text. Okay. Cool. And again, this will let you go forever. So we can type for a long, long time, and eventually we want to put in that 500 character limit that currently exists on the site. All right, so next we're going to add a simple post button that exists underneath the text editor. And if you guessed that it's going to be called button, you would be correct. That has a couple parameters. One, the actual definition of what's inside of it, but it also has an action. And that's what you would want to happen once you actually click that button, so it can decide, okay, is that enough content? Is it the right, is it under the limit? And then if so, it hits that endpoint for actually making a post request. Now that is everything here that we need for the actual action. And then we have to define what's inside of the button itself. So it's going to be a text item. It's going to say post. And you can see here this gives us a button. I don't know if it's actually clickable yet, but let's give it a little bit more foundation in terms of appearance. So we want to make it bold. we want to give it horizontal and vertical padding. 16. A little bit less on the vertical side. So you can already see it starting to move in the canvas. We want to give it a background color. So we can say, we can start it with color dot yellow, but we're going to change that a little bit later on. Right now we really need to give it a border radius or a corner radius. We'll say 10. How about 8? Okay, that looks a little bit better. We want to give it an actual text color. Okay. All right, so we want to vary the background color based on whether or not there's actually some text in there. Like you can see right now, there's 0 text. Obviously you can't post nothing, right? So this should be inactive and it should appear as inactive. So let's just look at the actual content of that state variable that we created, new post compose text. So new post compose text. And then we should be able to just use is empty. And if it's empty, we should do something. If it is, oh, I'm sorry, I am in the wrong item here. So let's move this over to background. All right, so if it's empty, we have to give it some other color. But right now you can see the default, or I'm sorry, the state where it's not empty is just yellow, so it's active. But if we just made it like black, you can see when we start typing, it does that. Basically, what I think we should do here is just use the same color with a little bit of opacity so it looks less active. Let's say 30% opacity. Okay, so we have, yeah, I think that looks pretty nice and close to what the website has right now. Another thing that I think we need to do is integrate the constants file. So we can say, right now we'll be really specific and we can make it a little bit more general later on. So say action button background color. We'll just make that yellow. And then we'll say we'll make this a little bit smaller. That's kind of ridiculous. Cool. And just to make sure that's connected, we'll say if we make it blue, cool. So I think we will be able to create like night mode, light mode, etc., or even allow people to customize colors because people have asked for that a lot for sure. So next I want to start creating the actual API integration. Like I said, we already have the API built, so there's nothing that we have to do on the server side, but we should start having a more organized environment for putting everything that we want to use to integrate with the API. So we should add a new folder here just for, we'll call it services. Okay. And initially we just want a post service. So that's the kind of API service that we're going to try to connect to is something that can handle post content like just our text content, and then eventually we want to integrate images and other kind of media that the site does currently accept on the web end. But for now, let's just make it compatible with what we've already built in terms of front end. So we're going to add a new file from a template, a Swift file, and we'll call it post service. Okay, so let's create a class for post service. And we want to create a singleton so that other things within this application can access it. All right, we also want to initiate networking services. So we're going to create a shared networking environment, if you will. We also want to use a base URL, but I think that's better served in the constants file. So we would say, and for now, we're just going to use localhost. It's on port 3000. And then within post service, we can define it here just directly pointing it to that. Constants dot, did I call that? Yeah, okay. So what we want is some functionality that directly correlates to the post endpoint. So we can make a function, and we want content, which is just the string content in the form, and we want a session token, which we'll provide later. We have not built in authentication. We're doing things a little bit out of order, but for now we're just going to add it as a parameter. And that can throw. Okay, so now we can define the function body. Okay, so we want to define the basic post URL endpoint. So we can actually create that over here. We can say private let endpoint is equal to, we'll create a URL object in the string, and then we want to add in the base URL, and then the specific endpoint is API / posts. We will actually define that inside of the function body. Okay, cool. So we can build the request object, which just starts out as populating the URL itself. We can build the request parameters. Post request, and we want to set some headers. We can say the content type is going to be JSON because we expect the JSON response. All right, so bear with me for this part, but we are just going to be pasting in this line here. We want to import the session token that are going to be sort of pasting in here for testing purposes. And it's just a cookie that Next.js expects because the website itself is built with Next.js. And this is how it expects that authentication to be provided for individual requests. Okay. But moving on, we can populate more of that input there. Okay, so post data itself is just adding in that text content that we had. And we want to add that to the body. Is equal to, we want to serialize the JSON. So now we have headers and we have the body populated. The last thing we have to do here in the service is actually call that endpoint. So we can just use that session that we created with the request that we created. And yeah, it's at least that simple there. It's telling us that we're not really using the result of that, which of course we can do later on. But the next piece we want to do is actually connect that service to the content view that we created. So we need a few more state variables and a regular variable to continue. The state variable that we need is in regards to whether or not it's actively posting, because we don't want them to hit the post button a bunch of different times. And it's kind of similar to our check against like whether or not there's actually text content in the input box. So we would say is posting, and it starts out at false. And we also want a session token, which I will populate manually later. All right, so last up, we want to create the post functionality within the view layer. And it's an async. It's an async function. And the first thing that we want to do is use that is posting variable. It's true because that's exactly what we're doing right now. And we want to catch any errors and just print that. Okay. Yeah. So we want to actually call the post service now. And the content is the variable that we created to store the text content. And the session token is that session token we created at the top and that will populate when we're testing. And then when we actually do it, we want to just empty out the input box. That way we know it actually processed it. Okay, so the next thing that we can do is connect that is posting variable to where we use is empty. So basically that background variable, that when the text is empty, we want to give it opacity of 30%. We also want to look at the is posting variable. So if it's posting, we also want to make that button inactive, and this is just appearance wise. So we also want to add a disable functionality. And basically that's the exact same thing. So it's disabled if there's no text or if you're actually in the process of posting something already. And the last thing that we have to do here is connect the action of that button to everything else that we've just built. So that's going to be a task. So we will await create post. So everything compiles right now. We can still use the actual form, but let me just post in the token from the website, and then we will actually test this and see if it works. So you can see that I posted in a session token up at the top here, and we're going to give that a try to post and see if it makes it to production. All right, fingers crossed. So it cleared it out, which it's always going to do, even if it fails. What we got here? Hey. All right, so it made it into the actual production environment. Yeah, that is fantastic. We have a very basic app here. All you can do is just post and interact with the site like that. But yeah, I want to just do a good iterative process of actually showing you how I'm building this, and then hopefully it's a good educational resource and it helps some people out. So definitely ask some questions, but if nothing else, definitely visit the site and let me know what you think, and try to be a member of the community, and I'd love to have you around there. So thank you for watching. I know it's been a very, very long video. Take care.